Hey guys, thank you so much for joining us in this episode of Disruption, where we talk about the existence of evil and also St. Augustine's perspective on that. Today, I'm bringing in a friend of mine named Stefan, who will be co-hosting on this podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to get right into it.
Why do we care about what everything means? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Why should we? If we're products of a universe that is fundamentally non-personal.
A long time ago, because this church is very old, we had a pastor, Gerard, who smoked a lot in his office, unashamedly.
Well, it's kind of a Reformed and Presbyterian tradition.
And it was the 1960s. So
that's a big part of it, too. Back then, the doctors were telling you to smoke. Those were the good old days. Now they tell you to stop. Good grief. It very much changes the framework of the question, did God create evil? If God created evil, how can he be good? By answering, no, God didn't create evil. He created something good, and that good thing was a world with people who can make genuine choices.
This is Disruption. So anyway, the audience would like to know you better.
Yes.
I wrote in my notes, the audience wants to know you, question mark. The audience wants to know you?
Does the audience truly want to know me? That's the question that we've kind of got to ask. I mean, let's be real here. That's a dangerous proposition.
So what is your name you're still the mysterious character?
The mysterious character. I would like you to censor my face with a black bar for the entirety of the episode, please. Thank you.
Should your name just be, should I write guest mysterious character
mysterious
on the title?
Character. If you want to. You can call me Stefan if you want to. Whether or not my real name is Stefan,
I can do that.
Who
mysterious
knows?
character, a.k.a. Stefan.
That's right, Stefan. In theory, my last name could be whaTaRWoll, but who's to say?
I don't know. You can't prove it.
You can't truly prove it.
Unless, I could try to look you up your house and stalk you, and then...
I recommend you don't. That's probably a bad idea.
Actually, I know a lot about you because I know where you go to Bible study.
Don't you dare tell anybody. Well, Bible study's almost over, so I'm probably safe.
Yeah, that's true. Well, are you going to the Bible study that's starting up after this, though?
Oh, yes, I will be. Yep.
Okay, so I still know what
Bible that's true. You're still going to know what Bible study I'm going to be at. Curses, I can be found.
So far, the audience has gained lots of information. You are Stefan, and I kidnapped you from Bible study.
That's right.
And we are...
The back of his van is nice.
The back of my Toyota Camry, or actually I should say the passenger seat of my Toyota Camry. I was going to ask, where'd you come from? Where'd you go? But,
mysterious places.
So what are your interests, mysterious character, from a mysterious Bible study?
My interests are, well, I guess to be pretty on point, Bible studying. Yeah, ka-ching, gotcha. Well, and that's I've been getting more into that to the extent that like Bible studies outside of church, right? Mm-hmm. I grew up, going to church. I grew up in a Christian household pretty much. And
PK.
That's right. My dad's a pastor.
Yeah.
He's actually preached at this church. So
yeah,
that's another piece of information they could potentially use to identify me or not. Who knows how much of a sleuth your podcast listeners are. But yeah, so I grew up in a Christian household, and it was definitely something where I was exposed to a lot of Christianity. And I was exposed to a lot of very thoughtful Christianity. It wasn't the, don't think about it sort of thing. It was very thoughtful because my dad studied law and, he went to seminary and all sorts of stuff. So I was exposed to a lot of philosophy and a lot of the Bible and a lot of Christian thinkers over the years. And the intellectual side of it has very strongly appealed to me. The intellectual side of a lot of things has strongly appealed to me just because I like learning. Mm-hmm. So specifically the intellectual side of Christianity has appealed to me a lot. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that more and the limitations of that because intellect only gets you so far.
That's actually a lot of when I spawned the podcast, why did I say spawn? I wanted to make it an evangelical podcast, I think, because I wanted to appeal to a wider audience of like believers and non-believers. But at the time when I started this podcast, I really, really got into Tim Keller's podcast, Questioning Christianity, which I've sent to you in preparation of this. I always send it to my hosts in preparation of the episode because I kind of wanted this podcast to have that feel of talking about God, but in a very like philosophical, kind of thoughtful sense.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of that. And of course, I mean, this podcast is driven in a different, the episodes that I've done with Ben Bessett have generally speaking been a lot of thoughtful ones, but then shifting more to counseling topics. And then probably getting back now into like more of the philosophical side of things.
That's right.
Yeah.
There's a pair of certified philosophers here.
Philosophers. For some reason, when I first heard the word philosopher, I was like thinking floss.
Somebody who uses good dental hygiene. Philosopher. Oxford English Dictionary. Somebody who uses good dental hygiene.
I was like thinking of somebody, like flossing their brain. And anyway,
I like that image, but I also don't like that image at the same time.
Yeah, I was like, my dad used to do this trick. Of course, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll be able to get this. But if you're listening on the podcast, you won't be able to get this because I'm about to show you something. But like, if you flip like an invisible string like in your mouth and do something out your nose, you can do like this, and it looks like you're flossing like a string up your nose in your mouth. And then you could also go like this or something.
Is that like potentially harmful to the inside of your head?
Yeah, but it gives the impression of like flossing your brain.
That's interesting. Like a philosopher.
Yeah.
That's right.
It
makes sense.
Dads come up with weird things.
It's true.
That stick with you forever. So
that you will one day pass on to your children.
Yes.
It's the generational kinds of thinking that we appreciate. Covenant theology, folks.
On that note, talking about generational sin or something. Okay. So now we got a little bit in your interests. What are some things that you read? What are some things that you're reading lately that you're picking up on?
So I've been reading, one of the things we actually talked about before this conversation started was you mentioned that you had been trying to get into the Church Fathers, and I had also had a very similar interest because the history of Christianity was something I had a lot of interest in. Mm-hmm. And as Protestants especially, we kind of talk about the apostles, and then there's a couple Church Fathers, and then there's this big blurry period that we don't really talk about. Yeah. And then it's like Protestantism. It's like, okay, boom, we're back. Let's go. So, I mean, that was one of the I don't want to say blind spots. That was one of the blank spots that I really wanted to fill in. Because Christianity has been around for 2,000 years.
Yeah.
Not a couple hundred years and then a vast gap and then, the last 500 years.
Yeah.
So I wanted to read the Church Fathers a little bit. I wanted to know what they believed. Mm-hmm. I wanted to know, to some extent, I was interested in the way that, Catholicism claims the Church Fathers very much as theirs. And then Protestants will also cite the Church Fathers. And then, the Eastern Orthodox will also cite the Church Fathers. So I started being interested. What did these guys actually think, right? Were they Calvinists? Were they Protestants? Were they Catholic? What were they really? What did they actually think? And, there's a sense in which they are very close to the apostles, at least in the grand scheme of things. So I think there's a validity to knowing how these Christians before the modern age, before the Middle Ages, thought about this stuff. Mm-hmm. And I started exploring resources. I watched a lot of YouTube videos. There's a lot of really good YouTube videos out there. I read a little bit. Mm-hmm. And right now, I'm actually reading Selected Writings of St. Augustine on Love, which is excerpts from St. Augustine on various topics of love and the love of God. And there's a lot of just interesting things in there about what he believed. But I've also been engaging with Augustine outside of this specific topic as well. Mm-hmm. I like your back wall decor here.
Yeah, credits to Joyce Trump, who was the designer of this room. This is the most up-to-date room in the entire church. case you
That's pretty. This wall
obviously.
specifically.
Yeah.
Like, don't get me wrong. The wall behind the cameras is really nice too.
Yeah.
But this here, this is great.
This is beautiful.
This is really great.
It's interesting because I don't know if you've listened to our previous, or if you watched our previous podcast on YouTube, you would have seen episodes 20 to 30. We switched to out of Magnified Church because they kicked us out into this room because they were hospitable to us. Go reform churches. No. Okay, joke. That was a joke. Love you, Magnify. No, but basically, so we had the table here set up, and so you would have recognized a lot of like that back room. I switched sides, I think, because I was bored of the color white, and so this side of the room was like just white, and basically, I mean, it's got texture and everything,
Right,
But,
yeah.
this room this side of the room just has a lot of nice.
There's just stuff here. There's pretty
there's
colors
stuff.
and pretty textures.
It
There's
keeps
many
it
things.
interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of, you got an interesting little globe over here. Definitely makes us look really smart and scholarly.
Right.
Even though there's really nothing inside those
Yeah.
books.
No.
There's just empty space. They're fake books.
Don't tell them. Part of the importance of storytelling is not telling people certain things.
Oops.
What I find really interesting is that painting, because it's just
Yeah.
got this huge void in it.
Yeah.
There's this huge blank space up here that's not pointing to anything in particular, and I feel like it needs.
You could fill it in with your
It's
imagination.
calling to me
Yeah.
that there's an emptiness, and that's probably to some extent the intention of the artist, to evoke that feeling.
yeah.
But there's like just open. I don't know why it catches my attention so aggressively, but it definitely does.
Yeah, because you got the open sky, and
Yeah.
it's really interesting, but there's just blobs of paint
Yeah.
in there creating this, but your imagination fills in the details.
Oh, yeah.
Like, this is obviously coastline.
Right, exactly.
But
it's very
it's
textured
like-
coastline.
It's very impressionistic, I guess, but
Mm.
it's just kind of interesting that it's just like literally just like strokes
Yeah.
of paint without any like detail, but you can kind of still,
It speaks to how much you can do with quite little to some extent.
yeah.
There's not an intense amount of detail in the painting, but it's so evocative because of the open spaces, the imagery, the power of the human mind to make connections. Humans are connection drawing creatures. We crave meaning in a way that's super, super deeply seated within us. The way that we
Yeah.
try to connect everything to something meaningful in our lives, something meaningful in how the world works.
Right.
We're hardwired to do that on such a basic level.
Yeah.
And I think that's something we should ponder on, because the first question is why? And the next question is, what do we do with that?
Yeah.
Why do we care about what everything means? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Why should we? If we're products of a universe that is fundamentally non-personal, that is fundamentally not meaningful in any
Right.
significant way. Why are we creatures that want to look for meaning, that are so hardwired to look for meaning? You could kind of poo-poo it away and say that it's a survival mechanism, a necessary survival mechanism, but there's plenty of creatures that don't have that. They're not
Yeah.
worried about what things mean. They're not worried about why things are the way that they are, but we are. And it leads us to doing really powerful things like philosophy and theology and things like that, because we're driven by something inside of us to make sense of things. It also leads us to doing some very silly things, like making theories about how the reptile people are controlling the economy. Because we look for meaning, and we see
Yeah.
two unconnected facts, and then we draw a theory out of that. And I mean, that theory can be good or bad, but the fact of the matter is we're driven to make theories and ask questions. And I think there's a very good reason for that. And as Christians, it's kind of like a signature. It's kind of like a homing device. I can't remember which author wrote about this, but the author wrote about how our craving for something beyond us is part of a sign of God's existence. Lewis picks up some of this stuff. He talks about, if you can't find what you're looking for on this side, odds are good that you were created for something on the other side, something beyond this.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of concept. It's the meaning seeking.
If ducks were created to swim, there must be a thing such as water.
Yeah.
So if I'm looking in this world for something that I can't find within myself, then it must have been created for another world.
Yeah.
So we keep looking for... Yeah, we're looking for meaning. So it must exist out there.
And you could theoretically say the fact that we're looking for meaning is a cosmic mistake, right? And as an atheist, you would have to draw that conclusion that our search for meaning is, well, it's either aliens implanted it within us or something, or it's a cosmic mistake and a great, great tragedy of the human race, that our search for meaning is pointless. But from a Christian worldview, that search for meaning is supposed to drive us toward our Creator. And it exists for a good reason. And that's one of what makes us so powerful and part of what makes us so dangerous as humans.
Yeah. It's probably why we're searching for aliens.
That's probably why we're searching for... No, I mean, unironically, that is part of why we're searching for aliens, because on Earth, we haven't found a consensus reason for why things are the way that they are.
Why does this exist, but there's nothing like us else out there in the universe?
So there's either something else like us that at least puts to rest our questions about why we're unique, or there's something better than us that made us, but pinky promise, cross your fingers it's not a theistic God. Because that would be really inconvenient.
They're looking
dreadfully inconvenient.
They're looking for anything else. They're like, oh yeah, some intelligent being created this universe because like only that could happen, and it was an alien. And I'm sitting here thinking as I'm listening to these atheists, I'm like, yeah, what if his name was God?
What if the alien's name is God and he rules the universe?
And they'd be like, no, it can't be.
It can't be God because God doesn't fit within a materialist framework of thought, right?
Yeah.
Because aliens...
Because God's spiritual.
It's true. And the other thing is, aliens don't have expectations of you. You know, aliens don't tell you to get your life together and stop cheating on your wife. Aliens just kind of... We just point radio telescopes at space and hope for the best. But God has very specific... It means something if we come to meet God. It changes what we do. It changes how we live. So they're very different kinds of answers, even though they're answering the same question.
So we talk about the existence of... Well, we talk about the existence of God, but also like the... atheists, this kind of brings about... Because in my mind, you know, atheists are very narrow-minded.
Sure.
I had an anthropology professor of a seminary that I audited, so it's like I didn't take it for credit or anything, but it's nice and convenient to audit classes if you can, because you could just kind of sit and listen to the lectures without paying for
Let's go.
A lot of it.
Let's go not paying for things.
Yeah, don't pay for things.
Don't pay for things, folks. Our advice to the audience, do not pay for things. That's the capitalists talking. Don't listen to them. So we've decided not to ever have you on this podcast again.
Suddenly Spotify was like, no, stop doing what you're doing. So when it comes to things like that exist, the atheists are very stuck on this idea that only physical things exist, so we should study them. Spiritual things can't exist because, you know, there's no God, because spiritual things are just a part of our imagination.
Sure.
And because we can't see any evidence of it, we can't study it. We're only going to study things that we can see that actually exists, which is kind of this whole theory of studying being is what we like to call ontology. And it exists. It's kind of so when I was kind of doing research on this, like 3 hours ago, this is my 3 hour research I was doing 3 hours ago. I said, hey, Stefan, let's do a podcast. And then that was last week. And then I was like, I will throw you some research. And I didn't.
I did my own research.
I started studying like 3 hours ago. It's kind of like cramming for a math test. But
you know, procrastination research is low-key the best kind of research.
It did, because I'm learning a lot under high pressure.
That's right.
So I'm like, okay, I've got to study this stuff. I got to understand. And then I started like learning things really quickly because my brain was stressed out. And now I know that ontology is a branch of metaphysics that deals with the nature of being, that sits under metaphysics, which is a category within philosophy. that studies a lot of things. But in metaphysics, we deal with things like abstract principles, knowing, being, substance, identity, time, space, all these kinds of things that Christopher Nolan likes to mess with in his movies, which is a kind of a separate topic. But anyway, I'm a big fan. I'm a really, really big fan of Tenet, or of Christopher Nolan and Tenet and Interstellar and blah, blah, blah. But so all that being said is I want to talk about, I want you to give me this, I want us to draw this discussion of evil. When it comes to evil existing, does evil exist? Or if it does exist, does it exist differently than things like this box that looks really nice?
Is it a box? Oh, it does open.
It is about, yeah, it opens.
You should put candy in there. Just for future podcast guests, just the little surprises in life.
I should be, or like a bunch of cigars. When Pastor Ben comes in, I just be like,
can I interest you in some nicotine?
Yeah. And we just start, not too long ago, actually, that's not true. A long time ago, because this church is very old, we had a pastor who smoked a lot in his office.
Yeah.
Do you know about this pastor? Probably not.
Am I?
Yeah. It was Gerard. I don't know. His name was Gerard or whatever. And he smoked a ton of his office unashamedly.
Well, it's kind of a Reformed and Presbyterian tradition to a large extent.
And it was the 1960s. So
that's a big part of it too. That's a big part of it too.
It's like, yeah, it's kind of like what the thing that the doctor would tell you to do. Anyway,
back then the doctors were telling you to smoke. Those were the good old days. Yeah. Now they tell you to stop. Good grief.
Oh my goodness.
Shucks.
So, does evil exist? And if it does, evil exists, but does it exist the way that things exist, or does it? I don't know what I'm trying to talk about. Can you help me try to?
Absolutely. I think what you're getting at is
the ontology of evil.
Yeah. Well, I think a place to start asking questions about the ontology of evil is to first ask why we're asking about the ontology of evil. Mm-hmm. And I think a big reason people struggle with evil and the fact that there's evil in the world and the fact that we suffer from it is because we talk about God. We talk about God being all-powerful. We talk about God being all good, right? Mm-hmm. As Christians, those are some of our most fundamental beliefs, that God is all-powerful, that God is good, and that God created all things that exist. And and this is a very old argument, one of the very old arguments against the existence of God has been the fact that if God created all things, and God is good, and evil is a thing, then either God must have created evil, or God isn't completely good, or there are things that God didn't create, which makes him not really God, or that there just isn't a God because it's a logical contradiction, right? So basically, as Christians, we have to give up one of our premises about God, either that he exists, that he's all-powerful, or that he's all good, essentially. And when you write that out as a logical syllogism, it's kind of scary. It's kind of scary. You write that out as logical syllogism, and it's like, oh yeah, I believe in all of the premises. I believe in this argument. Why do I not agree with the conclusion? Something is wrong. And as Christians, I think that can be challenging when somebody throws a heavy philosophical question at you, right? Philosophy is not something that we talk about a ton in Christianity as a whole. So I think it's easy to be scared by people throwing big questions at you and then to kind of retreat into like a simple faith. Right? And Jesus calls us to a simple faith. Jesus says, let the little children come to me. He says, unless you are like these little children, you will not enter the kingdom of God. Jesus doesn't say, unless you study the philosophy of Christian writers and thinkers throughout the, first to 21st centuries, you will not enter the kingdom of God. Jesus doesn't say, unless you can answer all of these difficult questions people throw at me, you won't be children of God. He says, unless you become like a child, unless you accept me in faith, unless you come to me with empty but open hands, you can be in the kingdom of God. So the questions about philosophy, the questions about that kind of intellectual stuff that I find personally interesting, they're not really the big questions. They help us think about the big questions. They help us defend our views on the big questions. But ultimately, they are not faith. Having an answer to the problem of evil isn't the same thing as having faith. It just means you're more at peace about it and you can answer other people's objections. You can provide a better reason for the hope that's in you, but you still have a hope within you even if you don't know the answer.
I also want to slip in here. I think it's kind of a false dichotomy or a false trichotomy or I don't know how many things there are that they mention or how many premises.
It's a multichotomy, just some number of multiples.
Yeah, they say like, okay, this is like the stuff that you believe, and you can't believe in all of it. You have to take one away.
Sure.
But I'd like to challenge that and say, can you add something that actually makes them all true?
Well, there's a few.
Yeah.
You can. I don't know if you could say that you could add something that makes them all true, but you've kind of got to interrogate the premises in a biblical way, right? So one of the big reasons why the problem of evil is so difficult for us, beside the sheer intellectual challenge, right? Just this makes logical sense. Therefore, my ideas about God are wrong. One of the biggest problems with the question of evil is the emotional problem, right? As humans, we suffer. And that suffering is real, right? Regardless of our discussions on the philosophy of evil, our sufferings are clearly real. We experience them. And when we talk about God being all good, it's easy for us to get bitter because we would think that someone who's all good, if he were like us, he would want to make that go away.
Yeah.
And I think that's true. I think that's valid, and I think that's why we have to engage with the question, because the Bible does give us answers to it. And one of the places we can start is, did God create evil? And I think we can say as Christians categorically no. When God created the world, he said everything was good, right?
Yeah.
And so we talk about the creation being all good. Everything that was created was good. We talk about humans being able to make genuine choices, right, that they're personally responsible for. And St. Augustine talks about how evil is not a thing. This is where the non-ontology of evil that we were talking about comes in. He says evil is not one of the things that God created. Because here's what is good. What is good is to love God above all things. Right?
Yeah.
We have many things in this world that we love, that we should love because God made them. God made them, and they're in some ways like him. I think part of the reason why we love the roar of a desolate ocean in its vastness and power is because there's a sense in which that points to its creator, God, right? There's a sense in which we love the complexity and the beauty and the brilliance of like the world that we see, whether it's nature or human-made stuff like this box, because they remind us of God who created us to enjoy things, because they point us to the fact that we were meant to be happy in a sense, that we were meant to make things, that the world is full of things that we can make and that we can do. So how Augustine approached this question of evil, this problem of evil, is that he said evil was not one of the things that God made. Evil isn't a thing, strictly speaking. What evil is when we take that love for everything else other than God, and we put it above our love for God. Evil isn't ontologically an entity that exists. Evil is a misordering of our loves, putting our love for other things above our love for God, or even despising God. So it very much changes the framework of the question, did God create evil? If God created evil, how can he be good? By answering, no, God didn't create evil. He created something good. And that good thing was a world with people who can make genuine choices. And one of the genuine choices that humanity made was that it subordinated its love for God under its love for self, right?
Yeah.
Serpent comes in the garden, comes to Eve and says, hey, look, this fruit is cool. It looks like it's delicious. It's attractive. It's desirable, and it's going to make you wise. We love attractive things. We love to be wise. We love things that taste good.
Yeah.
Those aren't bad things.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? None of those things that Satan offered are bad.
But then they loved those things more than God's command.
Exactly. They loved the things that were supposed to point to God more than they loved the God that made them.
Mm-hmm.
There's the great commandment: love your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, right?
Yeah.
And the reason that that's the greatest commandment is because that's the point of everything. All of the law, all of the prophets has that pretty much as its pinnacle. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength.
Yeah.
I'm probably misquoting that. But, and then what's the second one? Love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
Right? So that love of neighbor, why do we love our neighbor?
Yeah. Well, but you love God, who
Exactly.
and their neighbor is an image bearer of God.
He's an image bearer of God. He's a reflection of God. He's a fellow creature of God, right? So that neighbor, loving him, points us to God who made him. And we should love our neighbor because we love God. There's this thing, when people say they order their priorities, they're like, God, family, America, and then the Packers or something like that, right? And 10 out of 10 for putting God at the top of the priority list. But St. Augustine would disagree with that order. He would tell you, no. You should have one thing on your priority list, and that's God. And because of your love for God, all of those other loves are guided by him because of him. They point to him, right? They are subservient to your love for God. So if a child asks you, oh, Daddy, do you love me or God more? It's kind of a wrong question to some extent, because you have to say that you love God more than anything, or at least you should love God more than anything. But here's the thing. Your love for your child exists as part of your love for God. You can't set those two against each other. That false dichotomy.
Oh,
there we
yeah.
go. That's a false dichotomy because it's not really how it works. And because our love for God should absorb our love for all other things. Our love for all other things should point to our love for God. And so back to the question of evil. If evil isn't a thing, if evil is a misordering of our loves, then the philosophical question, the logical syllogism of, oh, God can't be all-powerful or God can't be good, or all of those things, it kind of falls apart because the premises are misleading, essentially. That being said, that doesn't really solve the emotional question, right? The emotional question is still there. Why do we suffer?
Yeah. Yeah, so you're dealing with, there's this theory side, which is what we just discussed, and then you have the experience, which is very difficult to understand. But I think it's very difficult to understand because we are finite beings, and when we look at evil and suffering, we see that's all that we see on Earth, in the universe. Yeah, that's all that we see because we exist inside of it. But to God, God can make sense of it because he's infinite. So he stands outside of everything. He stands outside of the universe. So to him, evil exists as like a little red speck in a vast, infinite space of his goodness. So it's kind of like, which to me, I could almost connect that back to this logical problem because you could say that God is all good, he is all knowing, he's all powerful, and he is also infinite, and he's just. So he hasn't dealt with evil today, but if we're looking at it this from God's perspective down, he has already dealt with evil because he's infinite. So to him, evil has already been dealt with. But to us, that's still the future. That hasn't happened yet.
Part of the tricky bits about living inside time, inside space, inside nature, right? We can conjecture about how it is for God being absolute. But for us, we're just moment, ouch, moment, That's kind of our lived experience inside time.
Yeah. So he's like stepped outside of it, and he hasn't dealt with evil now. Well, he will deal with it in the future, and he will be. That's part of like the character of God is that he's just, and the evil things have been already, well, he's everything's been preordained, which is weird because even evil has, in a sense, been preordained by God. And that's a whole nother topic of how that works.
That's a fun one to unpack.
But it's all been already ordained by God. So as it all happens, what will happen is he will set things right in the end. So all things will be part of his justice in the end. It's kind of interesting, but yeah, we're already in 40 minutes of the episode, which this has been a long episode. But I think I want to get into, I mean, I know we talked a lot about Augustine, so I'm like looking at my notes, seeing like, okay, what have we already covered and what have we not already covered? But
well, the part that we talked about is like the logic of evil.
Yeah.
I think dealing with the emotional within time experience of evil is a whole nother not can of worms, but it's a whole nother topic to talk about.
Yeah.
And then it will be a whole nother topic to talk about, like, God ordaining evil, too.
Yeah.
Okay, you kind of brought that up a little bit, too. I mean, that's also a whole topic. And then, like, living life in that gap between the fall and the redemption. Mm-hmm. And what is God doing in that gap?
Yeah.
Because there's obviously a point for the gap, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's obviously a reason why our lived experience is a lived experience of suffering. It's not that God made an oopsie and allowed humans to do a thing that messed up all his plans, but he's got a rescue operation, and that's Jesus, and Jesus is basically plan B. The whole garden didn't work out, but we're hoping for the best.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a really great way to understand the grand story of the scriptures.
Yeah.
So there's things to unpack there too.
Yeah. Might have to be another episode.
Sure.
That we'll have to do. Maybe.
I like the sound of that. Will not lie. I think that would be fun.
I think we'll have to think about that in the coming future. But for now, we're going to see you on the next episode. Catch you on the flip. Do you want to say something? Like,
stay safe out there, folks.
You've been listening to the Disruption Podcast, where we disrupt the culture and place Jesus at the center of it all. If you enjoyed the show, please consider subscribing from wherever you are. You can also follow us on Instagram. Once again, thank you so much. We'll see you on the next episode.